Well, welcome back to the Confident Advisor Practice Podcast. My name is Adam Fagora, and my guest today is Jesse Hurst. Welcome, Jesse.
Happy to be here.
Jesse is the Senior Wealth Manager and CEO of Impel Wealth Management of Cetera Advisors. With over 30 years of experience, he helps individuals and families navigate retirement, investment, and estate planning with clarity and confidence. Jesse's mission is simple: to help clients move life forward. With a deep understanding of these financial planning strategies, he combines technical expertise with a genuine commitment to meaningful client relationships. At Impel, Jesse and his team prioritize honest conversations and custom planning that reflects each client's unique goals and values. He's also the author of PopEnomics, a new book blending rock and roll and movie magic with real-life financial wisdom. And today we're going to dive deeper on PopEnomics. So with that, Jesse, let's get started. What inspired you to really write this book?
Yeah, so I have been writing blog posts since around 2010. And when I was part of a three-partner firm, the partners kind of took turns and rotated. So I'd write one every 3 weeks, one every 4 weeks, and so forth. And then, when I started that firm back in 1997, my two partners were 48 and 44. I was 31, right? So I was like younger than you even, But by the time we got to 2016, 2017, my oldest partners were retiring and moving out, and then I went out on my own, started Impel Wealth Management, and that's when I joined Horizon Advisor Network. Well, then I didn't have partners to write blog posts, so I started writing generally one a week, 3 or 4 a month, just to kind of keep clients in the loop with what was going on. And then during COVID, when things shut down and you couldn't be face-to-face with people, I really ramped that up and started generally writing 2 a week, which I've done since then. So if you go from 2020 forward, I've written probably 600, 700 blog posts.
Wow.
But they're always bite-sized pieces, right? They're not the full story. It's not like taking me from start to finish across an entire concept. And since most of what we do at Impel Wealth Management is help people cast a vision and then create the plans to make a successful transition from work life to retirement life, I wanted to be able to tell that whole story.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I really appreciate that, and such a unique experience too from the pop culture perspective. So thank you for bringing a different light to it as well. What were some of your favorite examples in the book that really brought pop culture to life in a concept?
Yeah, well, it actually really started during COVID, right? So every once in a while in the 5-10 years before COVID, I would bring some movie or music example in and so forth. But in the early days of COVID, if you remember back in March of 2020 when everything was shutting down, remember 2 weeks,
the craziness,
to bend the curve, right?
2 weeks,
right?
yeah.
And at the time, Jay Powell, who was the Federal Reserve Bank Chairman, and Steve Mnuchin, who was the Treasury Secretary, did a joint press conference, and they were, the CARES Act was passing, the Federal Reserve Bank was cutting interest rates to zero, and they said, this is an unconventional recession, an unconventional economic crisis, and we're going to have to use unconventional weapons to fight it. And the first thing that popped into my head was the scene from Animal House where Otter goes, we could use conventional weapons, but that could take years and cost millions of lives. So I literally wrote a blog post using the Federal Reserve Bank and Animal House as the basis for unconventional weapons. And I got such great feedback on it. A few weeks later, I saw a report that showed during the second quarter of 2020, the U.S. economy had shrunk from $21.7 trillion to $19.5 trillion. And I thought about it, I'm like, that means that COVID had dug a $2.2 trillion hole in the U.S. economy. And the first thing that popped into my head was the Friends episode where Monica and Chandler and Joey are at the beach and Joey's digging a hole and the wave rushed in and filled it, right? And I'm sitting there going, so I actually titled that one, if you know Friends episodes, they're all called The One Where. So I titled that blog post, The One Where Joey and the Economy Dug a Hole. And just like the wave rushed in and filled Joey's hole at the beach, COVID dug a $2.2 trillion hole in the U.S. economy, but the Federal Reserve Bank and the federal government rushed in with $6 trillion of stimulus. And you sit there and go, huh, we filled a $2 trillion hole with 3 times that amount of stimulus. Could something go wrong, right? Like, what are the unintended consequences of that? So when I got the feedback on those, like, people love those, and I was like, oh, this is fun. Yeah. And that's kind of what led me down that road of almost everything I write anymore. I use some movie, Broadway musical, TV show, classic rock song. One time and one time only, I used a Britney Spears song with the Federal Reserve Bank, who had screwed things up over and over again in 21-22, a blog post that I titled, Oops, the Fed Did It Again, right? But other than that, I keep myself in the classic rock genre where I'm comfortable.
So it sounds like you've used this approach with your clients, or it sounds like it's really evolved a lot more since COVID's happened as well.
Oh, yeah. And you know, when you think about some of my favorite ones from the book, right? One of my favorite ones that I used was just talking about the financial planning process. I used the movie What About Bob? I don't know if you've ever seen it with Bill Murray.
Yeah,
right?
Another movie.
And the book Baby Steps, right? But financial planning's like baby steps, right? You got to start here and you got to take the first step and keep going and build on it. Just like you know, they told Bob that he had to take baby steps to be able to get out the office and so forth, right? So that one we have a lot of fun with. One of the other ones that I really enjoyed was I used the song All Together Now from the Beatles, right? The old Beatles song, to talk about herd mentality, right? Because I've lived this long enough. So for those of you who don't know me or aren't familiar, I started in the business. So this is August, right? So I started in the business in August of '87. So it's 37 years ago this month that I started doing this. So 6-8 weeks after I started in the business, we had the stock market crash of '87. And I always tell people that one of my claims to fame is I was in the business during the stock market crash of '87, and none of my clients lost any money because I was so new to the business that I didn't have any clients and nobody lost money, right? But you sit there and you go, I lived through the dot-com bubble when everybody followed the herd off the dot-com cliff, right? I lived through the 07-08 financial crisis when everybody followed each other off the real estate and subprime mortgage cliff. And so I used that song title to talk about herd mentality and how when everybody goes one way, it typically ends badly, right? You know, I always say if the herd was right, the herd would be rich, and by and large, most people aren't rich, so you don't want to do what the herd does.
Yeah, right, you're right. So. You talked about financial planning being baby steps, right? Yeah. And it goes from, you got to go from the shift from saver to spender, being difficult for many. You know, you have a big part of your role is really helping people with the emotional and financial decisions. How do you help people make those transitions emotionally and financially?
Yeah, that's a really interesting, and I do it all the time, right? Like this is
it's your job at the end of the day.
What we're trying to do. So I always say that you look at your financial life in kind of 2 broad brushstrokes, right? You've got the accumulation phase from the day you start working to the day you retire, right?
Yep.
And the interesting thing is, if you've ever heard, there was a book back in, I always remember, it was 1997 or 1998. It was called The Millionaire Next Door. It was written by Thomas Stanley and his partner. And they basically say that the people who accumulate wealth over time have a number of habits that you see, right? One is no matter what they make, they spend less than what they make. They save the rest on a regular basis. They don't make crazy buying decisions on credit cards. They pay down debt, quickly. They don't make silly investment decisions based on tips they get at the golf course or online or from some blog post or whatever.
Or TikTok now,
whatever
it may be.
I'm not young enough or cool enough to be on TikTok, but
to be fair, either am I. So we're okay. We're on the same boat there.
But the cumulative effect of good habits over long periods of time is that people will build wealth. So if they've built enough wealth that we now feel they can make this successful transition from work life to retirement life, then one of the big problems that people have is flipping that switch, right? Because they go, I accumulated this and I have these resources because I did these habits over all these years, and if I change my habits and start because we say from the day you retire to the day you die is the distribution phase of life.
Yep.
And during the distribution phase of life, you're allowed to spend, you're allowed to use these resources you've accumulated to do the things that make life meaningful and important for you. But I have some clients that just struggle with it, right? I have a client, just real quick story, that this just happened in the last couple of months. I have a client that between both, they've been clients of mine since 1990, right? They're in their late 60s now. So I mean, you know, in 1990 I was 25, they were in their early 30s, right? So they've been with me for 35 years, and between both their Social Securities and his pension, he has a small defined benefit pension, they bring in like $6,500 a month, which is $78,000 a year. They have $2.5 million of investment assets with us that we've accumulated. Well, at a 4% withdrawal rate, that's $100,000. So between their pensions and their investment, you sit there and you go, we've got income resources from pension and Social Security, and we've got asset resources from what we've accumulated. We could spend $180,000 a year, and I can't get them to come close to that. Well, I finally got them. They're taking a 3-week trip to Australia.
There you go.
And they booked first class airfare, and both of their kids are very successful and aren't going to need their money. I mean, I'm sure they'll take it, but they don't need it, right? And they came to me, and this is one of the great comments I've gotten in the last 2 years. They said, you know, we finally came to the realization after you telling us all these years that we should spend our money, we finally came to the realization that if we don't spend our money flying first class, one day somebody else will. I thought,
very true.
That was like a great comment, right? It was like the light flipped on for them.
Yeah. Yeah, you were talking about really coaching people, and you know, in the book you also talk about turning out the negative news cycle, and you know, there's a lot out there in all different facets, shapes, and forms. How do you really coach people to stay focused and really avoid the panic?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I spend a lot of time. I write at least 1 or 2 blog posts a year, reminding people either of what the purpose of financial journalism is, right? And one of the things that's kind of funny was I'll ask somebody, like, what do you think the main goal of Money Magazine or CNBC is or whatever? They're like, they're here to help me invest my money so I can accumulate wealth for the future. I'm like, wrong. Their goal is to get you to tune in, buy, click, or whatever, right? That is their only goal. And it's why you know, you see a session on CNBC where you've got 2 people who are giving point counterpoint and there's no consensus, right? Because now you got to click and tune in again to figure out what you might want to do. So once people realize what the purpose of financial journalism is, I've written a number of, there's a big section in the book where I talk about the number of times financial journalism made these big promises, right? And they were dead wrong, right? One of the most famous ones was in the late 70s Business Week, after the stock market had gone through a horrible time period over the previous 12, 15 years. They put out a headline cover story called The Death of Equities, right? Right before the stock market went on an 18-year tear, right? There was one that they put out literally just in 20 or 21 that was somewhat similar. It was about, like, is inflation dead, right? We've slain the inflation dragon. Inflation's no longer an issue. Right before inflation went to 9% 18 months later, right? They're so wrong so often. And one of my favorite ones that we saw in the last 4 or 5 years was where there's a financial journalism cover where they named Sam Bankman-Fried as the next as the next coming Warren Buffett, right? And he's now sitting in jail, right? So like, I just remind them that if they were right, we would all just read Money Magazine, we'd all be rich, right? And we're not.
Yeah. As I was going through the book, really thought about it as it's a backstage pass to retirement. And that's very relatable to me. I'm a concert guy myself. What are, in your world, what do you think are some of the key takeaways, practical takeaways a reader can really get from your book?
Yeah. And let me, if you don't mind, let me go back one last thing, right? On the other piece is that so I started in the business in 1987, right? And I have this amazing chart that was given to us by the American Funds, by Capital Group, and it shows the stock market, the S&P 500, from 1987 through 2024.
Yep.
And you see this, line going up. Now there's lots of jagged pieces
Of course.
with it, but it also has black dots during the 19 financial, geopolitical, global war, and healthcare crises that occurred during that time. And every time those things happen, the media screamed the end of the world is coming, right? And so I wrote a blog post just a couple months ago about what happened with this trade tariff thing, right? Because if you think about it, if you think about the trade tariff thing on April 8th, so from February 19th, where the market hit an all-time high, to April 8th, 6-7 weeks later, the market drops 20%. There's massive fear, right? Massive fear about we're going to have massive inflation because of tariffs. GDP is going to fall off a cliff. Unemployment's going to rise.
The world was falling.
Corporate profits are going to get clocked because of tariffs, right? And if I had told you on April 8th that, hey, over the next 90 days, we're going to continue to have trade tariff uncertainty. There's going to be all kinds of uncertainty around Jay Powell's role, inflation, Federal Reserve Bank policy. There's going to be all kinds of uncertainty around the big, beautiful bill and whether we can get it passed and what's going to happen with tax law. And oh, by the way, in the middle of that, we're going to drop a few bombs on Iran's nuclear facilities. But don't worry, because 3 months from now, we're going to be at all-time new highs, right? People would have thought you were crazy, right?
We talked about that in the investment committee too, right? Like everyone would have thought you were nuts.
So the blog post that I wrote, I used the old REM song. I said, it's not the end of the world as we know it, right? Right?
That's great.
So you kind of try to have some fun with it, but remind people so that the next time this happens, and it will happen, right? There have been 19 of these since 1987. It will happen again. Nick Murray, who's an author and a coach in our industry, always says that these kind of financial lessons are like financial vitamin C. The body doesn't store vitamin C. You as an advisor have to give your clients financial vitamin C all the time so that they can be financially healthy, right?
Yeah.
So going back to your question about the backstage pass and some really important lessons from the book. I guess early lessons in the book. The book is written as the 12 pieces of a financial puzzle that you need to put together to put together to solve your unique financial puzzle, right? And so I think the first thing that I told people, and this is something that Peter J. Bush, and I talked about a lot during COVID, was a lot of people lost their bearing during COVID. They didn't know where they were anymore.
Sure.
So much had happened so quickly. And I use this analogy of changing planes in an airport, right? So if you are flying from Cleveland to LAX and you've got to make a connecting flight in Chicago or Houston or Denver, you get off your plane, what's the first thing you do? You look for that concourse map and you find the thing that says you are here. Because if you don't know where you are, you can't get to B37, right? You can't chart a course to get there. But it's the same thing with retirement planning. And then the second thing I would say is that I ask people a lot of times about the puzzle analogy. I'm like, you remember when you were a kid and you put together a puzzle or you did it with your kids or grandkids? What's the first thing you have to do? And people are like, well, you got to dump out the puzzle piece and you got to turn them over and you got to find the edge pieces. You got to find your four corner pieces.
Got to find the corners, yeah.
So first thing you have to do is look at the picture on the box. If you don't know what the picture is, you don't know what the ultimate is that you're trying to get together. So you have to figure out where you are, and then the picture is your ideal retirement, right? So those are like a couple of the kind of backstage breakthroughs that I think kind of frame the rest of the book.
I would have given you the same answer about the corners, the edges. Yeah. That's what I teach my kids as well. So you're right, though. It's having the picture out in front of you.
Yep.
And, Jesse, we've been working for a year together. I always really appreciate your analogies because they take it back to life and they take it back to things that are relatable to you as well. So it's really important for that aspect of things too, especially in these types of situations.
Yeah.
You've been doing this for over 37 years now. There's so many different aspects of what an advisor really is out there. I'll tell you, I had my own interpretations when I came into the business 14 years ago. What do you think most people really misunderstand about what advisors actually do?
Yeah, I think a lot of times people think, oh, they're going to help me invest my money so I can beat the markets, right? Or they're going to help me, predict the next time the market goes down so I don't experience that, right? And we all know, I just, in honor of football season coming up, I just wrote a blog post called 4th and 7 because it's called converting or scoring on 4th and 7, because if you go back over the last 7 years from June 30th of 2018 to June 30th of 2025, in that 7-year period of time, we've been through 20% downturns in the market, right? And in the last 7 years, if you didn't have a trusted advisor who could help guide you and give you good advice, keep you from doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, you could have panicked out. Now, the market's substantially higher today than it was 7 years ago, but we went through a 20% drop in late 2018 when the Fed was trying to raise interest rates off zero. We went through the 34% drop during COVID. We went through the 26% drop when Russia invaded Ukraine, and then the Fed started raising interest rates in 22, and then we went through the 20% drop here in February, March, April of this year. So I think, if you had panicked, you didn't have an advisor who helped keep you on course during that time period, you could have done the wrong thing and you would have missed the subsequent rebounds, because there's always the rebound, right? And so I said the number one thing I think an advisor is here to do is not to beat the markets and not to help you, not to predict the future that nobody knows, right? I always say, if you knew what the Wall Street Journal was going to say tomorrow, today, you'd be retired tomorrow, right? But it's to help people define their goals, and help them. I always say connecting their goals and their resources, right? It's the dreams and resources. We have these goals for the future, and we help them put some meat on the bone around defining what that looks like, right? A dream is, I want to retire someday and have enough money to live comfortably. A goal is, I want to retire when I'm 65 and have $8,000 a month to cover my basic living expenses and $20,000 a year to travel and do things with my wife and kids, right? That's a goal. So helping define those goals, and then looking again at those income and asset resources to determine, do we have enough fuel in the tank to get there, and how do we chart a path to get to the point where we've accumulated enough that we can then confidently transition from work to retirement. So I think that's really the main goal of an advisor. And then helping, I'll give you one quick story. So, right, one of the things that we do that is, I think, something that sets us apart is for our clients who are retired, and I've learned this through living through the dot-com 9/11 bubble, I learned this through living through the 07-08 financial crisis and the failure of AIG Lehman Brothers. The biggest threat, I think, to a lot of people in retirement is having to sell when markets are low in retirement. It's like dollar cost averaging in reverse, right? So one of the things that we do is when markets hit new all-time highs for the first time in 6, 7, 8 months, for our clients who are taking systematic withdrawals to live on or taking required minimum distributions, one of the things that we do is you make money by buying low and selling high. So we get them a little bit high, and then we refill their money market, short-term bond, limited term bond positions so that they're at least 2 years ahead in their liquidity needs, so they don't have to respond to short-term dips in the market, right? And like what we lived through in February, March, April of this year. So in 2022, October of 2022, the stock market was down 26%. The Fed had been raising interest rates, so the bond market was down double digits. It was the first time we'd seen a major sell-off in the stock market and the bond market at the same time in 3 or 4 decades, right? And I had a client who had to take his first required minimum distribution, and he was supposed to come in and meet with me in November. And in October, he calls me, he's like, Jesse, I know I'm supposed to come in and see you in 3 weeks, but I've got to take this required minimum distribution, and the stock market's down, the bond market's down, and I'm freaking out. What do you think I should do? And I said to him, he'd been a client of mine for 25 years, and I said, well, Dick, when the markets were near all-time highs in late 21, we sold enough, and we have enough money sitting in money market and short-term bonds to cover your required minimum distributions for the next 2 years. Plus, we have dividends paying in cash, which will cover a third year. So what I think you should do is turn off the TV and go play some golf and go hang out with your bank. And he goes, that sounds like a really good idea, right? And it's like,
click, bye.
Right? But that's what a financial advisor does, is provide clarity, strategy that leads to peace of mind and confidence, right?
Yeah. No, that's exactly how I always think about it now. Working with you guys is really, all right, how do we get that clarity like you talked about?
Yeah.
If there's one thing you hope readers really get from the book, what would it be?
I think if there's one thing that I would hope people would get from the book is it's never too late to start, and there's a path here laid out in the book that says, here's where you start and here's how you can move forward from wherever you are, right? And yeah, it's easier if you started this process when you were 25 or 30 or 35, but if you're 50 or 52, right, and entering your runway decade, right, there it is. There you go, right? There's still lots of things we can do to help you be successful.
Nah, really appreciate your time here, Jesse. I know we're getting close to the end here.
Yeah.
Where can our listeners grab a copy of PopEnomics and connect with you?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon. It's available on Amazon. Pre-order right now. It goes live September 4th. So September 4th, there'll be a Kindle version, a paperback, a hardcover version, and so forth. So it's available there. You can also go to the website, PopEnomics, Pop, E-N-O-M-I-C-S, right? PopEnomics.com. I had to think about that for a second. I've never spelled it out loud. But PopEnomics.com. We've got the website live. There's a link there that will take you to Amazon. And there's all kinds of fun resources on the website as well.
That's great. Yeah, so you can go to PopEnomics.com. It's available on Amazon as well. There's a couple different ways that you can really purchase the book. So, Jesse, I really appreciate your time, giving us your insight and really some of the nuances of the book and how it's really relatable to people as well. So thank you so much for your time here today.
Yeah, I hope people get a chance to check it out, and I hope they walk away from it. I said when I started writing the book, the last thing the world needs is another dry, boring, numbers, charts-based economic book.
Yeah.
Right? I hope people go, if nothing else, they go, hey, that was fun, and it reminded me of some really cool songs or movies or music, and I learned something along the way.
Yeah, who doesn't like some pop culture references along? Everyone's got it from a couple different decades, especially if you're referencing different things. So it's really great to see that as well. So thank you so much, Jesse. Thank you to all of our listeners, and we'll talk to you next time on the Confident Advisor Practice Podcast. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
The views depicted in this material are for information purposes only and are not necessarily those of Cetera Advisors, LLC. They should not be considered specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Neither Cetera Advisors, LLC nor any of its representatives may give legal or tax advice. Pete Bush, Bill Bush, and Andy Bush are registered representatives offering securities and advisory services offered through Cetera Advisors, LLC, member FINRA SIPC, a broker-dealer and registered investment advisor. Adam Figura is a registered administrative assistant of Cetera Advisors, LLC, member FINRA SIPC. The guest on this episode, Jesse Hurst of Impel Wealth Management, is a registered representative offering securities and advisory services offered through Cetera Advisors, LLC, member FINRA SIPC, a broker-dealer and registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity. 15015 Jamestown Boulevard, Suite 100, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 70810. These are hypothetical examples based on real client experiences. Outcomes vary and are not guaranteed.